It's been a while since I did a spotlight video, and I'm happy to say that this spotlight is for the most requested character by far. That's right, the spotlight for everyone's favorite pink-haired thief is finally happening. In case you don't know what these spotlights are for, they are made for characters who have had a recent uprising in the meta, whether it be the normal or pro meta. We go over the character and why they've come into the spotlight. Roll credits. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. In this spotlight video, we'll be focusing on Maeve of Blades. So, believe it or not, Maeve has indeed had a pretty crazy and unexpected uprising into the meta. A character who has long been looked at as not worth it suddenly became a reasonably consistent pick, and even a ban in some cases. When I first saw this happening, I really couldn't wrap my head around it. Many of us have had this stigma with Maeve for quite a while, where we thought the character wasn't much more than a throw pick at higher levels. But at the highest possible level of play, Maeve is being picked up and doing well. It's nothing overly crazy, Maeve isn't the next Makoa or anything, but the pros have been finding plenty of value in her. I do also want to point out that this success isn't something that's only happening in pro play. In the last AFC meeting, Maeve's performance came up for a moment. At Diamond and above Elos, Maeve is proving to be the most successful flank, sporting the highest win rate of the bunch, now that Xin and Koga have received nerfs, that is. Apparently, Maeve has been doing well in higher Elos and ranks for a while, but it's not something we've really noticed anywhere until the pros brought her into the spotlight. I know that must be mind-blowing to some of you. I get it. It was definitely mind-blowing to me when Evil Mojo told us about her. It completely goes against the general perception about Maeve, further proving that the vocal perception doesn't always match up with reality. A large purple man once said, "Reality is often disappointing." But when it comes to this, thankfully that's not really the case. Many of us have been waiting a while for Maeve to finally come back into the limelight. Oddly enough, it's not like this happened over any buffs either. Maeve hasn't received any groundbreaking buffs in some time. Yes, recently Maeve received a buff to her Pounce heal card, and an extra second to the duration of Prowl, but these were relatively minor, and didn't impact her character in any real way. The duration was a nice little thing. Prowl is often cancelled early anyway though. As for the Pounce heal card, that buff basically did nothing due to the Pounce DR card being the much better option since DR can't be cauterized away. So Maeve's uprising into the meta completely came out of trying something new, experimenting with it, and making it work. It started little by little, with Maeve getting picked by one or two teams here and there, facing plenty of downs until the ups started to come in. Now multiple teams are picking her up and even banning her. Now of course, Maeve isn't the next Makoa or anything. You can't pick her in basically every situation. In her case, it isn't practical. She has plenty of strengths and plenty of weaknesses. What are they though? Well, for strengths, Maeve has a lot of mobility, stellar range and poke for a flank, powerful burst with Cat Burglar, and powerful anti-tank capabilities with Street Justice, as well as good sustain with her self-healing and DR cards. Let's not forget her ult denies your enemies of their most important asset, their vision. Weaknesses? Well, Maeve is squishy. Less health makes her more susceptible to burst. Her margin for error is also rather low. With a roughly 1 second fire rate, one miss could be detrimental in a 1v1. There's also her skill requirement. To play Maeve really well, you need a lot of skill with the character. If you don't have that, then this particular weakness outweighs all of the others. When deciding when to pick Maeve up, all of these things are taken into account. I've noticed that most of the games Maeve is in, there isn't a Leon or Cassie on the enemy team. Either Leon or Cassie aren't picked, are banned, or are on her side. This brings me back to the burst weakness. Maeve is squishy, and Leon and Cassie have a lot of relatively easy to land burst. Leon in particular also limits Maeve's mobility strength, due to her auto-aim. It doesn't matter how mobile you are, Leon is guaranteed at least 800 damage on you, and that's nearly half of Maeve's health. I also noticed that Imani was in a similar boat to Leon and Cassie. The Maeve pick was avoided if she was going to end up facing Imani. This makes sense. Amani completely takes away Maeve's mobility strength, with her up to 2.5 second root. And Amani also has burst thanks to her mana. Those three ladies give Maeve the most trouble by far. Without them though, Maeve has a lot less to worry about, so she can be played to her full potential. I also want to point out that Maeve can be played for two very different reasons, to great effect with two different talents. And by most characters' standards, that's a lot. Both Cat Burglar and Street Justice are amazing options depending on the situation. Street Justice, from what I saw, and from what many of you probably also expect, was picked when the enemy had tanks that Maeve could easily execute through their barriers. Tanks like Fernando, Khan, Atlas. Terminus is banned in the PPL I believe, but he would be on this list too. All these tanks greatly depend on their barriers. 3 of them hold up their barriers themselves, so they're both directly behind them and slowed while holding them up, making them easy targets for Maeve's execute. When it comes to Atlas, his barrier can absorb an infinite amount of damage, but it can't stop a melee attack like Pounce. Pounce goes right through it, offering some counterplay to Atlas's very powerful barrier, with his only defense being that he could stand a ways behind it. If you're quick with the Pounce as he puts it up though, he's as good as dead, no time to back up. Cat Burglar is the one picked when these tanks aren't taking up both of the enemy tank slots. Instead of focusing on bringing down tanks, Maeve focuses on putting this burst into enemy squishies. Genos is also very prevalent in the meta right now thanks to his healing buff and a Luminary. Luminary does stack with the damage bonus from Cat Burglar, bringing Maeve's 520 damage after prowling up to nearly 600. One set of Cat Burglar daggers with Luminary can do about 1200 total damage, and you have 2 sets of amped daggers after prowling, allowing you to take down anyone just under 2400 health in 2 sets of daggers. I also want to point out that her base daggers also go up to 460, 10 above her original 450 dagger damage, before both of her damage nerfs. It is worth mentioning that you can also pounce as you fire off a set of daggers, leading to some pretty impressive burst if the enemy is within pounce range. Speaking of range, Maeve does have the best range and poke out of all the flanks, making her much more valuable in between team dives than the other flanks. Much of the game is spent skirmishing from a distance until one side gets the first pick, and Maeve is by far the most valuable flank to have during this time, while also being very valuable during pushes and dives like the other flanks as well. As for Rogue's Gambit, it is arguably the most fun and most definitely the most skilled of her talents. It offers a lot of potential mobility, but isn't as lethal or impactful as the other 2 talents. Hurts to say because it's probably my favorite talent in the whole game. Now, what about maps? Well, due to Maeve's impressive mobility and range, a variety of maps are open to her. You could, in theory, pick her on any map and do well with her. She is very versatile in that regard. But there are of course some maps where Maeve is good on, but still outclassed by others. Like on Frog Isle, Eevee excels, since Eevee can blink over the walls to harass snipers. For Maeve, harassing snipers on Frog Isle isn't quite as easy of a task, and unless both snipers are banned, they are always on Frog Isle in high-level games, especially pro play. On maps like Fish Market and Frozen Guard with much longer sightlines, Maeve is your ideal flank, since no other flank can play at those ranges to the same level of effect. So how about builds? What does one run on Maeve to maximize her effectiveness? Well, let's look at Cat Burglar first. So there are 2 different builds I see on Maeve for this talent. They are nearly the same, but not quite. You'll notice Sixth Sense is in both. You want this high, at 4 or 5, ideally 5, in any Maeve build. You're going to be pouncing a lot, and all you have to do is activate Pounce to get the DR. It's a very solid card that ups your survivability. Street Cred is also very common. I personally recommend running it at 2 at the least, to bring you up to 2000 health. But I have seen some braver people run it at 1 as a filler card. Chase is a great card. Keep it around 3 or maybe even 4. You do already have 50% bonus movement speed and prowl, so you don't have to stack too much more on top of that. This is a card that's effectiveness goes up the lower your rank or elo is. The lower you go, the more speed plays a factor in how many times you'll get hit. but of course that doesn't mean it's not useful at higher levels. On Edge is a great filler card. 9 lives does have a longer cooldown than most abilities, so lowering it by any amount helps. The only real difference in the two Prowl builds is if you want Walk It Off or Featherlight. One gives healing, the other gives DR. To me, it depends on the map and how you use Prowl. If you're often running behind things with Prowl, the healing is more effective than the DR, since you won't take any damage anyway from behind a wall, so you won't get cauterized. If you're using Prowl in an actual fight more, the DR tends to be more effective since it won't be cauterized away. So deciding depends on how you play. As for Street Justice, you could honestly still use either of those two Prowl builds and be fine. The only super important pounce card is the DR one after all. This is one I like to use personally though. This gives you movement speed after pouncing. I use this for both Street Justice and Rogue's Gambit. That movement speed can definitely get you out of harm's way after pouncing faster, as well as help you make rotations faster. I do have a soft spot for this build, it's pretty fun and still effective. It's more of a personal thing though. If you do decide to run Rogue's Gambit though, I think the movement speed is very impactful on that talent. Anyway, that's it for the Maeve Spotlight. I hope all of you who requested it in the past are finally satisfied. Again, these aren't videos I can make whenever. They depend on a certain character rising up in the meta. If that doesn't happen, I can't make them. They aren't traditional how to play guides after all. However, I could make those too. But yeah, feel free to let me know what you guys think of Maeve's Uprising in the comments below. And that's pretty much it guys, I want to thank you all for watching, I very much appreciate it, and I'm gonna see you guys laters. Bye.